Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. I am back on the grid after a couple of weeks of Dear Orioles stories, and of course, the Peter Principals at work, and there'll be more Dear Orioles letters coming to Adam Jones and Zach Britton and Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette and Chris Davis and anyone else left here on the SS Angelos. In the aftermath of this, the Los Angeles Dodgers will play in Atlanta later on, and this guy is our Baltimore friend. He's my first friend in media from the Baltimore News-American, and of course, Mount St. Joe, where he'll be back for Hall of Fame ceremonies later on in the month, and a Loyola Greyhound, but never a Don. We welcome Chris Pika back. He is one of the directors of the Bahamas Bowl, as well as doing all sorts of things for the Pro Football Writers and the Ray Lewis induction next week. Chris, I remember when things weren't active around here last winter, when things were boring and quiet. Nothing boring and quiet about this summer, beginning with the Stanley Cup win, and then just leading right into this Oriole fire sale and the Flacco Lamar Jackson thing, and the Ray Lewis thing, which is really sort of a scene setter, I think, for the whole season and where the Ravens organization has been over the last quarter of a century.
It is interesting to realize it's been 5 years since Ray Lewis retired, coming off the field after Super Bowl 47. And where the franchise stood at that moment, and you're thinking, okay, they just missed the Super Bowl the year before. They win it the following year, and they look like a team that probably is going to continue to be in that mix. And we look, a couple of years without the playoffs, some fan malaise, if you will, and changes upcoming after the 18th season as far as general manager. If the team doesn't win, you can see changes at head coach, obviously the quarterback situation. It just tells you how much, as much as you think you know at the NFL and your team's trajectory, you really don't know. Because that night in New Orleans, with Ray stepping away and the team holding up a trophy, I don't think anyone could have looked at the next 5 years and seen what we've seen between the changes, Ray Rice, anthem controversies, everything else. I mean, it's, every day is a season in the NFL.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. And, now that we've blown the whistle out there and they have these extended camp for the Ravens, you say that's a good thing. They have a lot of things to work on in the passing game and the offense in general, a lot of new bodies, a new defensive coordinator, a quarterback they drafted they're trying to get reps for. All that sounds good to you. Go out there and you play another week and a half. We've seen so many injuries happen. I'm just nervous about all of this, especially for a franchise that has turned injuries into a little bit of a cottage industry lately.
Well, injuries are part of life in training camp, and I know there's some older coaches, and John Harbaugh being one of them, that feel like you should get extra week to acclimate yourself to camp, to acclimate yourself to hitting in camp. But this is part of the CBA. This is part of what was negotiated out. The players didn't want to have as much hitting in training camp, and so when you do have that come up, and you get a lot of a good share of non-contact injuries too. Guys step the wrong way and bust an ankle or a knee. I mean, that's just the way it is, and that's always going to be part of the game. It's how you manage it. You better hope that your roster is deep enough that if you do suffer an injury like that, you've got a guy waiting right behind it that will that can step right in and play at the position.
I don't think anybody's been out there, looks at Flacco and says he's washed up at this point. And if they were looking to re-energize him, light a fire, whatever that thing that was going to happen, I find it fascinating for the national writers. And, I'm out on Twitter like you and following the people that are around the team that are like, Flacco's going to play, and from the looks of it, he might play well based on what's going on around him. And then outside of it, Lamar Jackson will be playing by week 8, and the Ravens will be 2-5. And, all hell's going to break loose. If that happens, it probably is more in line with the franchise being in trouble and Marshall Yanda being old and Ronnie Stanley being broken down and the wide receivers not being any good and the running game not being any good. As much as it would be, Flacco threw 4 picks and he looks slow and he looks old and he can't read defenses and he's not, his arm's shot. I mean, I don't think any of that's part of it's going to happen here this year. I like the way I see Joe Flacco right now, and I think this is going to be a better football team than maybe people outside of Baltimore think it's going to be right now.
Well, listen, he didn't have a lot of targets. Okay, I think everyone can agree that the group that surrounded him the last couple of years has not been
elite.
Has not been elite. I think that's right, and we throw that word around a lot about Joe Flacco. Okay,
well, some do. I don't, but others
right.
do.
But I'm just saying that always that question about is Joe Flacco elite? That's about as much a meme as anything else that's out there during football season. But I think most people can agree that the receiver corps has not been that good. And that they have to be better. Okay, they have upgraded some at the position. Does competition drive somebody a little bit? Or, but I went through we went through a quarterback controversy when I was not a controversy, but sort of that same situation in New Orleans in 2000, 2001. We had Jeff Blake as our quarterback in 2000, and we were well on our way to the playoffs. And then Jeff got drugged down behind in a game against Oakland and busted up his knee. And Aaron Brooks stepped into the breach, and no one really had a book on Aaron because he'd been holding a clipboard in Green Bay for Brett Favre for a time. And so he leads us to the playoffs. We get to 2001, and the organization has to make a decision at that point on who the quarterback's going to be. And it, quote unquote, it was an open competition, but I think everyone knew what the end result was going to be in the building. Everyone knew that this was going to be Aaron Brooks' team sooner than later. And it wound up being that way. Jeff competed very well, but they handed the reins to Aaron because of Aaron's age, and they thought they would run with it. Now, some people would think, hey, you should have stayed with the veteran. And we had the same choice a couple of years ago with a backup quarterback who was an in-state quarterback in Jake Delhomme.
Well, if you move on from a Joe Flacco type of guy, a $25 million a year guy who won a Super Bowl for you, you better be damn well sure that Lamar Jackson's a guy you can win 12 games with. And I don't know that to be true. And by the way, no other team in the NFL thought they could win 12 games this year or anytime too soon with Lamar Jackson, or he would have been selected. I mean, I keep going back to he's not a sure thing. He's not Peyton Manning. He's a project, and it's a project that's going to be more than the first 6 games of this year, the way most experts saw it that way. Not me, football, the people that did the drafting, not media people that looked and said, do I want him to be the face of my franchise? Every team in the league said no once. And for that reason, I don't think the cake is baked. And I'm not nearly as interested or fascinated in him as I am in can Joe Flacco win 12 games this year.
Well, yeah, I guess the point I was trying to get to was with when we had Jake Delhomme as a backup quarterback. Now, that was a special situation because Jake was an in-state guy, and Louisiana people want an in-state player, and Aaron was struggling, was struggling at the position, much like Joe had been struggling the last couple of years. The difference was Aaron had better receivers around him, I think, at that point than Joe had maybe the last 2 years. But everybody wanted the backup quarterback, and Jake never really got an opportunity in New Orleans, and we flamed out with 3 games to go to make the playoffs in 2002, and that led eventually to a lot of changes in the organization. Of course, Jake went to the Panthers and took them to a Super Bowl opportunity where they lost to the Patriots late. This one feels a little bit different. Joe is obviously still got his fastball. He has receivers around him. Yes, Lamar was taken late in the first round. And yes, a lot of teams passed on him, but there were a lot of teams that didn't need a quarterback and maybe didn't want to take on that project. But the bottom line is if Joe struggles early on, there's going to be a lot of pressure on a coach who admittedly is going to have to make the playoffs to keep his job at this point. More than likely, if they miss the playoffs again, John Harbaugh's out of a job. At what point does the pressure become so great that if you're struggling, do you make the change? Or do you ride and die with Joe Flacco? More than likely, I think he rides with Flacco the whole way. But what Lamar Jackson does gives you an opportunity to run packages with him, does give you an opportunity to use his skills a certain way while you're getting him acclimated to the pro game. Sooner or later, Lamar Jackson is going to be the starting quarterback of the Ravens. It could be as early as 19. Who knows? I mean, as Flacco's number goes down, maybe that makes it a little bit easier, but the way it sets up, he is the quarterback of the future at this moment, provided there's not a coaching change and after the season. And at some point, he gets the reins. I don't think he'll get it in 18, but stranger things have happened. Joe Flacco wasn't supposed to be the starter in his rookie year either, and it wound up with some injuries and some things gave him an opportunity. So that's the beauty of the NFL.
He is Chris Pika. He is Blog and Tackle out on Twitter. He's down in Atlanta, GA, just like the Bandit was back in the day. Or was that the Snowman? I think he was in Savannah. I'm not sure. But you can find him at Blog and Tackle. He'll be back up here in Baltimore and, of course, visits us once a month or thereabout to talk about this and that. And you're one of the old school guys like me, Chris, that, watches a little tennis, watches a little golf, covers a little baseball, does a little of that, little of the Machado thing, and your Orioles fandom from far out. And I know you've been monitoring my dear Orioles letters and monitoring all things going on with the baseball franchise. For the baseball franchise to just sort of go away as the Flacco, Lamar Jackson, Ray Lewis Hall of Fame thing comes right now, maybe not such a bad thing that the Orioles go in the corner and feel shame for a while, but there's still so much unfinished business here, and you're down there in Atlanta where Nick Markakis is running around, and they're talking playoffs, and you're going to have Machado running in there this week. The Orioles don't have any of that going on, and I don't know what their offseason is going to look like, but this sure is a bad look in the aftermath of all of this because they might lose 125 games.
I don't think the Orioles are done as far as deals are concerned, nor should they be. I think everyone on that roster, for the most part, is not is touchable as far as other teams that maybe want to make a deal. You're trying to get some guys back and restock the farm system. You need some arms to carry you forward. I thought Dan Duquette's comments post Machado trade were very interesting, and that he talked about some of the things that he wanted to do in that position. And I think that's the most we've ever heard from him, kind of talking about the future and about what they need to do to compete. I think that is as strong a statement that there has been, the change that everyone has kind of talked about from Peter Angelos to the Suns is more or less complete. I don't think a general manager, even an lame duck general manager who may be out the door at the end of the year, he wouldn't be making a statement like that talking about scouting, analytics, international stuff unless he felt emboldened from the Suns that was where they're heading. That they're going to modernize the franchise, at least, to this decade, is what they need to do to win baseball games. And, 5 or 6 years ago, if a general manager had made those kinds of pronouncements post-trade, he probably is out the door the next day, the way Peter had worked. So
it's a fascinating study to let a guy who's lame duck run your franchise and be the one that's talking about dealing Bundy and Gaussman and Scope at this point this week. It's the level of incompetence that I've seen here over 25 years has been jaw-dropping, but at this particular tender point, to have a guy running the place who's not going to be running the place, dude, I'll just never understand it. I'll never get it.
I'll say this. If you're doing a job, you do it until the day they relieve you. And that's the job he's been given. And anybody worth their salt doing a position, a high-profile position, whether it's head coach, general manager, those guys are going to continue to do it until the day they walk out the door, okay? Different situation with Ozzie Newsome because his successor has been named, okay? But he's going to continue to be active up until the moment that the reins are passed to Eric DaCosta. It's no different here. They're paying you a lot of money to do a job. Whoever is in charge above you has told you you're in charge of getting this done. Obviously, you've got to talk to them and communicate with them what you're trying to do, and that those things have to be signed off. But they've obviously, you've hired a guy to do the job. He's going to do the job until the time he's relieved of that. Okay, if the Angelos Suns thought for a moment that it was not a proper situation, or they felt like they should make a mid-season move on a GM in order to start this, they would have done it. At that point, knowing what was at stake. They obviously feel comfortable with what they've laid out to try to get done here in the next 10 days as far as trades and acquiring players, and that's what he's going to do, and it's going to carry him to the end of the year. And the statement he made, like I said, referencing those things, I've got to wonder. I'm starting to wonder if Dan Duquette's not the general manager of this team in 2019, based on what he's saying and the fact that they've let him have the latitude to make those moves. I wouldn't be surprised.
Here's Chris Pika. You can find him at Blog and Tackle. When you say I wouldn't be surprised about the Orioles, I don't know what, the notion that John and Lou are going to go out into the market and get a top-flight baseball executive at this point, Duquette might be as good as it gets at this point. Maybe there has been a change of heart. Maybe Buck wants to come back and manage a bunch of kids because he wouldn't get a job anywhere else. But I tell you what, the stench of 120 losses is going to stick to all of them, well into next year, no matter what they pull here. And it's nice to see Yusniel Diaz running around and whatever, but until those guys get to the major leagues and can perform at that, we're always going to be scratching our head because it doesn't feel like there's a cavalry coming over the hill for the organization.
No, but you work every day. I mean, I was inside that bubble in the NFL for 7 years, and you got guys down the hall. I remember when Jim Moore was let go, and we brought in Bobby Petrino, and you've got Rich McKay was our general manager, and you've got that change of coaches and. He's in there working every day, and the staff's in there working every day, scouts and others, to make the team better. And you continue to do that until somebody walks in the door and says, "Hey, you're done." And there are some good baseball people out there that are around the game. And it might be the best they can do. And as far as the stink of 120 losses, yeah, it's going to suck for the fans. Okay, and this is the point I've made several times. As long as you basically come out and say, listen, folks, the next 2 years, 19 and 20, are not going to be great. We're going to rebuild this from the bottom up. We want you to be patient with us. We do have a plan in place. This is what we want to do. Buy in with us. There's going to be a lot of tough nights, but you're going to see a lot of kids play, an opportunity for a lot of them to come up to the major leagues and have an opportunity to make an impact. And we're building towards something.
Well, I should interject at this point. You were with the Birmingham Barons, with Michael Jordan, and with Tito Francona. So, watching Double-A baseball is something you spent a long part of your life doing, looking for every Mike Cameron that was coming through that was going to be a 12 or 15-year Major League Baseball player, right?
Right. That's right. And so, it takes a buy-in of the fans, too, or the organization has to basically come out and say, this is the plan. This is what we're trying to do here. And I think that's hopefully the next step out of the warehouse is that you hear something to that effect as they move forward and they decide, okay, who's going to be the general manager of this team? What's Brady Anderson's role going to be? Is he the shadow general manager that has no accountability because he's playing both sides of the line? I mean, I've heard that from people. There's a lot of questions yet to be answered, and to be fair, there is, and I think your series has highlighted that. Other people, national writers, have highlighted that. The dysfunction in the warehouse is still prevalent, although with I don't want to say removal. Let's say the fading away, if you will, of Peter Angelos's influence on the organization.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be any better with these kids who may or may not be any more or less inclined to be competent. I mean, competent, it keeps coming back to competency, and ideology, and there hasn't been a whole lot of that. And I don't know that I'm seeing anything right now that tells me that they're running it better. I mean, they dealt Machado with 12 days left to go during the All-Star break to get less than they would have gotten 6 months ago, a year and a half ago. So it's not some success that they dealt off Manny Machado for one top 100 prospect in baseball. I mean, I don't look at that as, wow, look at what they did that's great. They're still screwing up. I mean, just the fact that they've gotten to this point.
But someone else was in charge less than 6 months ago or a year ago, okay? To be fair, there was someone else in charge of that, and that was Peter Angelos. And so even if the kids wanted to make those kinds of moves and were maybe advocating, we don't know that, the person who's signing off on it said no. And now they're in a position, where they say yes. So I don't want to judge the sons on the father's sins here, okay? They have the reins at the moment They made the deal at this second. We'll find out if it's a good deal or bad deal as the next couple of years go on, next couple of seasons. But you want to throw it on the old man. That's fine, and I think that's I think that's okay to do that, and I think most fans would agree with that. But they weren't in charge 6 months or 12 months or 18 months ago when they could have made other decisions that could have netted them better players. They made the best deal they could make for Manny Machado at this point, now that they're what seems to be in charge. And we'll see what they get for other players like a Zach Britton or Adam Jones or anyone else that other teams may be interested in as the deadline creeps closer.
Jones is interesting because he's so expensive. Well, they both are. I mean, they're both making a lot of money. You want to rent Zach Britton, it costs you $4 million plus whatever you're going to give up. You want to rent Adam Jones, going to cost you $6 million plus whatever you're going to give up. So these guys don't just come in return for a nice AA prospect and some kid at high A ball, right?
Right, and Jones's defensive acumen has dropped a little bit. His range is not as good as it was a few years ago. And teams are going to have to take that into account. Yes, he is a veteran presence and is a very solid baseball player. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did deal Adam Jones for prospects that Jones isn't back in an Oriole uniform in 19. Okay, I think they would like to have him back. It seems like he's the type of player they want in the clubhouse because, as I spoke to a friend recently, when Adam Jones leaves the club, let's say they do make a deal for him, whose team is it in the locker room? And this person made a great point to me. This is Adam Jones's locker room right now. For better or for worse, he's the leader of this team. If they deal Jones, who's the leader going forward? Whose clubhouse is this? At one time it was Cal Ripken's clubhouse. At one time it might have been Mussina's clubhouse. There has to be a guy in there who's the leader, and you look at the roster as it's constituted right now. Is it Jonathan Scope? Is it?
Well, he might not survive either. I mean, Gosman, Scope, right. Bundy, their names are out there as well. Look, none of these guys are selling tickets, right? So it's not like you're keeping them around because you like their name or you like their bubblegum card. If you don't believe you're going to win in the future with them, or by the time they're button pops like Machado did last week, then why bother with it? I'm not so turned on by Bundy or Gosman or Scope, quite frankly, that I don't think they can live without them. But to your point, who's going to be left? Who's on the team opening day next year? That's really the question right now. Do you want Scope on the team? Do you want Bundy to be your opening day starter? Do you want Gosman around? Or do you want whatever the return would be? And I love the fact that they're listening. I don't love the fact that they don't have an organizational strategy. And if you keep saying to me, it appears Dan Duquette might be here next year. Well, if Dan Duquette might be here next year, announce the 2-year extension right now and let everybody know he's running the place. That's what professional organizations do.
Right. And I don't disagree with that. It just, like I said, what we haven't gotten at this point is someone above Dan Duquette. We haven't had it for 2 decades, of someone coming out from ownership and saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're seeing different signs. We're seeing Dan Duquette talk about things that everyone in the industry knows they need to do to catch up to the rest of the league. Okay. A smaller move, but a good move to the fans is the bringing back of Brooks Robinson into the fold. Okay. Severely overdue and never should have happened in the first place. But the fact that they were able to get that done, it's a small thing, okay? It doesn't mean anything on the baseball field. It doesn't mean anything in terms of wins and losses. It's a feel-good to the organization, feel-good to the fans. But the fact that they were able to do it where that didn't get done until a month or two ago to bring him back in, there are little signs like that that tell me that we are at a crossing here for the organization. That people are speaking out in a different way. They're saying things in a different way. They're doing things in a slightly different way. That gives me a little bit of hope, but I also need to see the plan, and that's where that's really the next major communication from the club is, where are we going from here? And hopefully that comes sooner than later.
He is Chris Pika. He is Blog and Tackle, and you are a big part of the Pro Football Writers Association and handling PR and all the stuff they do. Obviously, their biggest event is next week, and Ray Lewis, and we're a part of that. We have 4 busloads of folks going. If you still want to jump on our bus, throw me a note, nasty@WNST.net. We can make some space for you. The Ray Lewis thing, it really is quite the coronation for the franchise, right? Like, I don't know of any other player that's so synonymous with a franchise that came in on the front end. You don't get many opportunities to write the kind of storyboard that Ray Lewis wrote in his career all the way through. And for that, we'll all get together and celebrate next week, and I think that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. I mean, it's hard for players to do 2 things. One, in this day and age, in the setup of the NFL, is it's hard to stay with your original team all the way through your career, okay? Especially a long career like his. And he had some opportunities to walk away maybe and to find another team, and he did investigate that at the tail end of his career. But the impact he had on the franchise, the impact he had on the city, the fans, all of that. He's not going to be the last Raven to go into the Hall of Fame, but he's the last Raven probably to go in for a little bit. I think it'll be a while before we see someone in purple back up on the stage in Canton. But it's, to have an entire career played in one place, the impact he made to this team, and it's also sort of a window into what the Ravens used to be, and hopefully where they'll get to again sooner than later. But the glory days seem like they're a million years ago now at this point. But hey, 2 Super Bowl trophies, and what he's accomplished, and I'm sure it will be an interesting speech when he closes out the ceremonies in Canton. I don't know how long it's going to be, and I don't know, It'll be interesting to see what comes out of his mouth for 30 minutes. I mean, I'm sure it will be passionate. It will be sincere. And there will be, you'll be like in a church on a Sunday for 30 minutes. It'll be the gospel of Ray and his career. And I think that's going to be fun for everybody in attendance there. But I think with the people they have in place who are going to be inducted, I think they probably needed to start the ceremony about 2 hours earlier than they have it planned for.
Well, we got rid of T.O. He'll talk at all, so that's good. So that's one less speech we got to work with. Chris Pike is here. He is Blog and Tackle out on Twitter. He's been my friend since January of 1984. We still have a football team around here when I met you. It's crazy, the first football team. You can find me in the buy on Toyota.com Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Nasty@WNST.net reaches me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming around the world. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.